Welcome to this segment of Spirit at Work. Today, our guest is Sylvia Trundle, who is a captain in the Akron Police Department. It's good to have you here today, Sylvia.
Good morning, and I'm very glad to be here.
Let me ask you, your background. How did you decide to go into police work? And what age did this come for you that, this is what I want to do?
It was not my initial intention to get into police work, but in 1979, when I graduated from Copley High School, I was looking for maybe some part-time work that would supplement my adventures at the University of Akron. So I was very blessed to have gotten a job as a part-time dispatcher with the Copley Police and Fire Department. And that's where I met one of my first mentors, a very strong lady by the name of Mary Bivens, who introduced me to the world of safety communications and police and fire. And pretty much from then, the bug bit. I mean, I'd been exposed to a lot of police officers back in the day. My family, my mom and dad, seemed to be a local diner for a lot of the police officers that were on duty. And so I got to meet a lot of the officers and get to hear their stories, and it was all very interesting. But when I first attended the university, I was thinking about maybe going into law. But then I proceeded into the part-time world of dispatching, and the bug sort of bit, and then it took off from there.
That's great.
You know, some folks out there that might be discerning a career or maybe in the midst of a transition of some kind, when you say the bug bit, I think we all know what you mean, but could you expand on that? How do we know when the bug is biting?
I think when you're engaged in a great job like I first had as a young person, and I realized what I could do, what I could accomplish, the people that I was meeting at the time, the talent that I saw within the fire and police departments, and what those people were giving back to the community. Because Copley at the time, very small township, it became quite like a family, and they brought me into the fold, and you just felt like part of a very special team of people that did a lot of good. I mean, I remember working midnights dispatching and putting that tone out for maybe somebody having a heart attack whose family I just talked to on the phone, knowing that the men and women would be rolling out there to try to rescue this individual in distress. Being the voice behind a radio, knowing that you're sending officers into very dangerous situations and making sure that you had that communication, that you were listening and engaged in the process and trying to keep them safe. And at age 18, that was a pretty important job. And having been at the University of Akron, I started taking sociology courses and realized that I just really enjoyed working with people and doing things that were in a helpful type field.
Yeah. Tell me, you mentioned helping. What specific abilities do you feel you have brought to police work over the years?
Probably some of my strengths would be the communication skills. When you get into this job, you really start to have to do a self-assessment. What strengths and weaknesses do I have, and recognize those as you go into the job. I know physically I'll never have the brute strength of some of the officers that, thank goodness they're there, because when we're going through the door of a SWAT call or something like that, you want that big guy on the key. But you also want people that can talk to people, to calm the situation down. And through the people that I work with, my mentors such as Mary Bivens, some curmudgeons that I grew up with by the name of Robert Bubba Wurs, and I would ask for people to say prayers for both of those individuals. They're both in bad health right now. But it's people like that made me realize, you have a special skill set, and this is how you can best utilize that and contribute to your community.
You know, there was a time when I guess there was perhaps a bit of a stereotype as to what a police officer is, and women breaking in as police officers was kind of unusual at one time. You're evolving as a police officer and a woman. How has that been for you?
Well, it was a challenge initially because when I first wanted to maybe test for the police force in the city of Fairlawn, unfortunately I met with some difficulties. I had to file a civil rights violation, which was a very difficult thing to do. I was working full-time as a dispatcher there at the time. They had hired me based on the skills and abilities they had seen while I was at the Copley Police Department. So I had a good job in place, but I just wanted that next step, which was to be in the police field. That lawsuit resulted in my ability to then attend a police academy, which I did very well. And that was part of the agreement that if I graduated successfully, I would become a police officer for the city of Fairlawn, and I was their first full-time female officer. But some of the best advice I ever received was from my grandmother, Sylvia Phillips, who said, "Don't change. She knew what I was about as a young person. She set some very strong foundations for me, as well as my parents, and grounded me quite well. And she said, you know, when you enter these kind of jobs, you know that things can change you, but don't change what you're all about. And I've really tried to maintain that philosophy, and I think that's been successful. And it is difficult. I mean, there were times when it wasn't because maybe I was a female, but maybe it was because I was the rookie officer or whatever, that, you know, you had some challenging times with fellow officers. But I always believe that that's what makes you who you are today. You overcome those challenges and you realize, I want to make it better for someone else. Maybe follow that golden rule. I don't want to treat anybody unless I would want to be treated like that. And I've tried to maintain that throughout my career, and I've been pretty, I think, successful with that philosophy.
You mentioned the golden rule. Are there other core values, like when Grandma said, don't change, that you've brought with you, that have stuck with you, that have been certainly significant through the years?
Absolutely. Both my grandparents and my parents, the work ethic. My parents worked a job for the Akron Beacon-Journal that entailed 7 days a week, 365. My parents were not somebody that just called off sick. They couldn't. I mean, that was a job they were committed to. We had to do it. And as a young person, I was part of the job process. We delivered newspapers for many, many years. My grandma was the first female school bus driver for Revere, and very proud of that. So it was definitely the work ethic that I received from them that I think is very important in this job, because it's tough. There's days you think, I don't want to go in, but you realize you're a critical part of a team. They're relying on you, and it's incumbent to follow that.
You know, some folks might not appreciate or understand how the Akron Police Department actually works. Now, you're a high-ranking officer. How many captains are there? What's the structure? And how does the police department administer itself, so to speak?
Well, we have the rank of police officer, sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, and chief. And if somebody would have told me, you know, so many years ago when I first started over 28 and a half years ago that I would be a captain with the Akron Police Department, I never would have believed it. I mean, I always looked up to the commanders of the area police departments and thought, wow, maybe someday, you know, I'll be a sergeant even. But I have had so many opportunities through the different ranks that I've achieved, whether it's attending schools or networking with some great officers. But the bottom line is it starts at the officer level, and that's the most important level of our police department. That's where the action takes place. That's where you're sending those first-line officers out there to meet and greet the public, to deal with all the difficulties going on. And I have the luxury to be able to supervise some very, very talented individuals that we currently have with the Akron Police Department. But I'd be remiss not to also include our safety communications personnel. And as I said, I started out in that world of dispatching. And to this day, I give those people great credit, because they are a true first line of taking those calls. And that's the first impression the public gets before we do send our officers out.
You mentioned the public's impression. You know, there's so many cop shows they speak of on TV, and
right.
A lot of people get their notion of that's what police work is like. What would you want to say to folks to say, you know what, some of that's a mistaken notion, here's more what it's like?
Well, you can't encapsulate a case in an hour. We all know that. And then with commercials, that takes it down to about 40 minutes. The paperwork is very, very onerous for many of the cases that the officers are investigating. There's so much legwork that goes into an investigation. And then, to me, the final thing would be to say that the good guy doesn't always win. I think when you see the wrap-up of some of these shows, it's always, everything ends up neat and tidy. Unfortunately, we're a system. We're a criminal justice system where there's a system of defense and the prosecution, and sometimes it doesn't always work out that what we think would be the good guy is coming out on top, and we have to start it all over again and go back to the drawing board. But it's a very difficult emotional, physical, spiritual process that many of these cases take, that you don't see that dimension in a television show.
You obviously have been an effective leader, and someone has recognized your leadership potential and ability. What, as far as you're concerned, are the attributes of an effective leader?
I think one of my strengths right now is probably my listening. When you're supervising a group of officers, it's very important that you listen and watch for signs and symptoms of any kind of problems that might be surfacing within your organization. And I encourage my supervisors, my lieutenant and sergeants, to also be good peers, and even the officer level, to be so sensitive to those around you, because this job does take its toll. As you know, we are involved in shift work. You know, we work the holidays. We just deal with a lot of terrible things, unfortunately, we see on a daily basis. And those stressors take its toll on individuals. Sometimes we see it come out, whether it's maybe marital issues, maybe some substance abuse, just a change in demeanor. So it's always been important to me as a leader to recognize that I have to watch my people and take care of them. And I'm very fortunate that we have good resources in our police officer chaplaincy center, our safety forces chaplaincy center, with Reverend Bob Denton. He's a go-to person for me. When I see something like that I think that I can't deal with as an individual or as a peer, I have a professional that I can turn to. And we do have some resources that we are mindful of when we see those things going on.
And say a little bit more about the stressors. What, if somebody comes to you, what are some practical suggestions you might give that person that's going through a lot of stress?
That you have to turn this job off sometimes. One of the things that we recognize is a thing called hypervigilance. Hypervigilance can keep you alive, but it can also really eat you spiritually, physically, and again mentally, because you are always on that constant alert for the bad, for the cynicism, for who's going to hurt you, things like that. And when you're always on that high and then you try to turn that off when you go home, sometimes you can't. You're still feeling like you're an authority figure all the time. And when you go home, sometimes that's not always appreciated. There's family dynamics you have to take care of and other things going on that you're not always that authority figure. And it's very difficult. But again, some of the things that are the shift work, the inability to get the time off to do things with the family. So you're getting a lot of pressure that I need you here, but you can't always be there. And I see officers sometimes getting too caught up in working the extra jobs. Yeah. They're trying to, provide a good living for their families. Sometimes we have the ability to earn extra money, but that takes them, again, away from the things that they could be doing to reduce their stress internally. And unfortunately,
I'm going to stop you there just for a moment because we're concluding this particular segment.
Okay.
And we'll have Sylvia back for our next segment. Stay tuned to Spirit at Work.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Father Norm Douglas.
And I'm Larry Vuillemin. We founded Heart to Heart Communications to strengthen the connections between people's inner spirit, ethical values, and daily work.
Heart to Heart Communications offers values-based leadership development programs that exist to guide and inspire employees.
Consider the idea of a 60 to 90-minute program on renewing the purpose and spirit of your relationships at work. Get in touch with us. We'd be happy to connect with you.
Welcome back to this segment of Spirit at Work with our guest, Captain Sylvia Trundle from the Akron Police Department. And I'll ask our good attorney to start off the segment. You know how they like to ask questions.
Is there such a thing?
Yes.
Well, that's my question. Is there such a thing as but you mentioned that word hypervigilant, okay?
Yes.
And maybe that's the way I've been feeling lately, okay? But you mentioned it in the context of some of the officers with whom you work, or maybe even personally. I know that you're a community leader, a member of Leadership Akron, have a presence out there in the community, also in community policing and some other things. That word hypervigilance, do you see that as having application to a lot of business and professional leaders as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you see the mentality that they have to work around the clock to be successful, and they don't take the time out to, again, maybe self-reflect or to maybe get more engaged in their community. There's so much that when you give back, you get, I think, and that's what I have found out in some of the boards that I've belonged to. You find your passion. You have to find something outside of that constant stressor of the work world, and that's you just have to find that, whether it's something to do with children or women's issues that I really am engaged in, or the animal issues I'm interested in, arts and culture. There's so many things in this community that are in need and are wonderful ways to reach within yourself and then give back. And again, you get so much back in return from this community if you just put your hand out and extend an invitation, whether it's through your time and talents or money even. It's amazing.
Let me follow that up, if I may. And I know this personally because you and I, in my criminal justice career, we've been on the scenes of some of the worst kinds of tragedies, and you've borne witness to some of the worst things a human being can do to another human being in terms of violence. What keeps you from becoming negative or cynical with the exposure that you have to that darker side of life, let's say?
I definitely have a strong faith foundation. And when we talk about spirituality, for me, I really make it a point of revisiting why it is I took this job. Because sometimes you can be very dispirited. You can start losing the faith and hope that brought you to this position in the first place. You can start saying, you know, I don't need to respect that other person. They're bad people. I don't have to treat anybody with dignity because, you know, they're in the situation they are. But when you turn that around and you think, but I came on to this position because of all those things that I valued so deeply. I wanted to be able to see humanity at its best. And sometimes we do. But we do see it at its worst. And you've got to maintain that balance. I've got a spouse, Mark, that introduced me to the outdoors. And for me, that's a place that I find a lot of peace and solace when we, you know, take off and go to the woods and hike. And I just love being in nature. And I have a wonderful church community that I belong to that I find a lot of peace with and friendship. And, you know, they don't care that I'm a police officer. They just look at me as a fellow church, you know, worshiper. And I just find that a very refreshing and replenishing type of environment to be in. But I do try to surround myself with positive people, and I think that's been part of the progress I've gone through is to belong to boards and organizations that are the same mindset. They want to do good by this community. Because I think in the big scheme of things, we all should be on the same page. I think if you look at our agency, the fire department, the city administration, what is it we want for this community? And that's to make it the best place to work, to raise a family, to, you know, engage in good activities, to have a good neighborhood. And we're all on that same team. And I think if we keep that in perspective, we'll be a much stronger community and organization.
How about being able to share in some way your spirituality, your faith with others, whether out in the wider community or obviously in the police force? I know it's a sensitive issue because we have diverse faith traditions, but are you able to do that in any specific kind of way that's appropriate and might even be good for somebody who needs to hear a message you offer?
I think it's just, again, taking the time, simply being in a police cruiser out there, putting your hand up and waving to that person who oftentimes they look away because they don't think the police officer is going to be a friendly presence or a positive presence. And if you put your hand up to somebody, it's amazing. They put their hand back up and you get a smile. You make that communication. You take time to talk to the person on the street that you see might be in some distress. The amazing stories that I have found from people out there, the individuals that are living in the tent cities behind the Furnace Street mission, just the people walking the streets. If you take time to talk to them and you find out their story, it opens up a whole world of different opinions about what people are. You can't just put them all in one, you know, glass and say, well, that's them, that's half empty, and this glass is half full because they live on this side of town. There are so many great people in this community that unfortunately maybe have fallen on some hard times, but are just looking for that little bit of friendship or somebody just reaching out to them. And I think that as police officers, again, that's what we come on for, is to be that person to protect and serve. And I see that as some of the most powerful words that we have in our organization, because those come directly from commandments to protect and serve the people of this community.
How would you invite the community to better support the difficult work that law enforcement often is? You know, where might the community need to pay a little bit more attention to help serve you and to also protect and serve the community?
Well, I think that people need to be mindful when they see how much scrutiny we're under. I think, of course, we're probably favorite subjects of the media. And to take a look at that story and to understand there might be another side to it of what an officer is also going through. Unfortunately, we've had some officer-involved shootings through the years. And, you know, there's still officers that are so greatly affected personally by the tragedies they've been involved in. So for people to understand the difficulty of our job, and I think one of the strengths of is our ride-along program. Many people from Leadership Akron come out and walk away saying, this is one of my favorite opportunities, was to ride along with a police officer. We have no idea what they go through on a daily basis. And it gives them a greater perspective of when they read a story or hear something on the radio about what an officer has been involved in to give us that support. We're going to be looking for citizens to be even more involved, and that's something that's critical for this agency, because as we are depleting resources, we're going to be looking to people to say, what are your priorities for this agency to respond to? We're not going to always be able to respond to the calls we have in the past. It's just not practical. So as a community, help us establish what it is you want us to see we're involved in. And I think people have a good sense, and they can sit down and use common sense and help us work through some of these issues. I'm involved with some very active block watches with just amazing people that are just, citizens that have maybe retired, or they're just blue-collar workers that can relate to what it is we're doing and have the greatest respect for this organization. And when I go to my roll call sometimes after I've been to a positive meeting like that, I say, hey guys and gals, there are people in this community that think you are doing the best job out there possible. And they need to hear that support, because sometimes we do feel a little bit beat down, and that support is there. Sometimes it's quiet. Other times it can be, come to the forefront. And I wanted to say something about the other day. My lieutenant and some of our meth team worked on a very difficult case of an individual that was manufacturing methamphetamine in the city of Akron. Unfortunately, there was a family directly impacted by his actions, and their daughter, who was associated with this individual, ended up dying earlier this year in Pennsylvania. This family followed the case. They attended the hearings and the court proceedings. At the end of that, they donated a substantial amount of money to the officers to give back to the charity of their choice, because they felt those officers had really become passionate and involved and caring about seeing a wrong taken care of in this community, which is, manufacturing meth is a horrible thing going on right now. Those officers decided to donate it back to the Summit County Safety Forces Chaplaincy Center, which provides that support of debriefing for all safety forces after critical incidents. But it's that kind of support we see from people. They recognize the difficulty of what officers go through, being on that stand, having their characters questioned, taking it to heart of what has happened to someone in this community. In this case, their daughter passed away. They offered no excuses for her behavior, but that was their child. And they saw a group of Akron officers totally committed to making sure the individual that had been doing a lot of harm in the city of Akron received a just sentence, which he did. And as a result, an organization that takes care of safety forces in this community benefited from that.
You mentioned this family getting the support, too, that they needed, as well as giving support. Are you involved with victims assistance, and can you tell us a little bit more about that maybe folks need to know about?
Yes, I'm very involved with victim assistance. I'm on their board currently. I have just respected that organization through the years that since I came on. They respond to our critical incidents. They take a huge burden off of the officers in the field so that they can continue the investigation, while oftentimes the advocates that arrive are dealing with the emotional impact and aftermath of something horrific that has happened with our families. They're just a great organization. I also belong to Greenleaf Family Services on their board, and the Women's Endowment Fund, which really generates income for organizations supporting women and girls. So there's some things I do that I want to see tailored to this community to take care of some of the issues such as domestic violence or people that are victimized, and it can happen, as we know, at any level of our society.
We're filming this 3 days before Christmas. As a peace officer, and summing it up as best you can, what might you say to the world when we get a little bit too frenzied, hyperactive out there and everything, to really gain that peace that we're looking for?
Well, I always go back to that scripture, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And I go back to that, and you take it to heart, because God has a special place for the safety forces in our communities. I often think that He must be riding along with us every day, because there's situations that these men and women out there, I always pray that they come back to me at the end of my shift. But when I send them out at roll call, you just try to send them out in the best frame of mind possible. maybe with some levity, just with a sense that there's somebody within here that cares about you, cares about your family, but wants you to come home safely, and then I can send you home to your family safely.
Hey, thank you so much for your presence here and for sharing, because I do think you gave a whole nother perspective on police work that a lot of people don't think about because we watch TV and get so much of it from there. Certainly, it's been great to have you on a show, and keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for the reminder that all of us in the community need to be involved too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for our closing segment when Larry and I share a few closing reflections. Hi, I'm Father Norm Douglas.
And I'm Larry Vuillemin. We founded Heart to Heart Communications to strengthen the connections between people's inner spirit, ethical values, and daily work.
Heart to Heart Communications offers values-based leadership development programs that exist to guide and inspire employees.
Consider the idea of a 60 to 90-minute program on renewing the purpose and spirit of your relationships at work. Get in touch with us. We'd be happy to connect with you.
Welcome back to this closing segment of Spirit at Work. We've just been able to interview Sylvia Trundle, captain in the Akron Police Department, and Larry and I now share a few closing reflections. And I was real struck when Sylvia mentioned that the fundamental mission of police officers is to protect and serve. You know, so often I think, because a lot of people are influenced by television and media images, that people may think of police officers, oh, they're warriors, they're fighters, they want to use their gun, they want to get the bad guys, they really get a lot of energy out of that. And it struck me, and again, she's a beautiful example of that, but I know so many officers who are, that, hey, we're peacekeepers. We want to do something positive. We have a servant's heart. Certainly Sylvia showed what a servant's heart she has, not only her peace work, but all that she does for the community.
And I connected to those words hyper-vigilant, as having application even beyond the world of the police officer. You know, so many of us get caught up in that con of busyness, and maybe we're a bit too hyper-vigilant ourselves. You know, I think there's need to protect and serve ourselves too, not in a selfish way, but in a way that respects who we are, just as Sylvia's grandmother respected the person that she was and encouraged her. And on this being filmed 3 days before Christmas, and it's not just the Christian season, but these holidays and holy days respect several religious traditions. We might ask ourselves, what's disturbing our peace? Where might we be at war with ourselves? Where might we be hyper-vigilant? What step can we take? Maybe it's just a good walk in the woods, as Sylvia said, to really get in touch with what's going on inside.
Thanks, Larry. And again, as we wrap up, concluding with what Sylvia said, blessed are the peacemakers, all of us, for we are together children of God.